meeting is being recorded.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the May 10th edition of the Multi-Network Community Sync. As a general reminder for all these meetings, this is governed by the Kubernetes Code of Conduct, which boils down to please be nice to one another. So please do be nice to one another. Raise your hand if you want to ask questions or add something using the Zoom raise your hand feature. We do have an attendees list. It is usually helpful for these groups to know who's showing up. That helps to gauge interest and all kinds of other things. So if you wouldn't mind adding yourself there, that would be appreciated. I'll put the doc in the chat as well, just in case people can't get to it fast. I'm kind of standing in for Maciej, who is out, I think, this week and next week, and usually runs these calls. I think most of you know who I am, but for those of you who don't, my name is Shane. I work at Kong on Kubernetes networking. I am a SIG network chair and a maintainer of Gateway API. I always come to these meetings, but candidly, I don't know if I'm going to be able to run this very well. So, so I'm going to need some help. So as I'm going, I'm going to basically be asking for volunteers to kind of help me along the way here. I'll try to drive a little bit. We have agenda for today. Only basically one thing, and then talk about the CAP. I would definitely, it's an open agenda. I would definitely invite people to go drop things into the agenda for today for discussion. Yeah, so with that, help me out, but we'll start with the first agenda item. I don't know the name here, but present dynamic resource allocation could be used as API for additional network interfaces instead of a pod. Go ahead, if you're here.
Unfortunately, Patrick is not yet here, and
okay.
I really hope that he will be. And there is another person from the same team, Marcus Lehtinen, who is working on QoS CAP. Both of them is part of like my team inside Intel. We are working on several aspects of resource management in Kubernetes. And today we actually wanted to discuss few things which was brought to our attention when we were presenting the QoS CAP to SIG network people.
Cool.
I just don't know.
I think I remember now. I'm Marquise because I recently CC'd myself, and I have been looking at this one, so I'm familiar with this one.
Yeah. So practically the QoS CAP resources, it was initially started with use cases in mind about like cache allocation and block IO. So both of those resources is kind of like shared resources always, and it's all in throttling mechanism. So after playing with those, we decided also to add something related to the network to it. And Marcus was demonstrating on SIG network scenario when with QoS classes can be used as a like to supply the parameters to bandwidth plugin through a CNI interfaces. However, this mechanism of QoS classes is quite extensive, and it can be very flexible. So Tim Hawking brought to attention what it can be misused to enable some of multi-network usage scenarios. Like, so for example, like
Indeed.
some of the functionalities what Multus is doing is potentially can be represented as QoS classes, even though it's a bit of, as I said, like misuse of things. Well, actually, I see Marcus is already joined.
Cool. Yeah.
Sorry.
And
I was a bit late.
Yes.
Oh, go ahead.
So that's one part of the story. Second part of the story is the feature what my colleague Patrick and several other colleagues implemented in Kubernetes 126, and 127 it was some improvements about that. So that thing is practically enabling more complicated usage of devices, like all kind of accelerators in Kubernetes, kind of like next generation of device plugins. And dynamic resource allocation also is very flexible thinking. And after, during some of again discussion with Tim Hawking, he was saying what it's very close to what WSIG is trying to implement. And we came here to discuss actually scenarios if we can cooperate with things, because for us, like making the dynamic resource allocation as a pod level resource and when passing down parameters to CNI, it's not really a big problem. So we can easily extend the feature what we already have to use it as a secondary network interface potentially. And so we came to discuss to see where we have a common points and where we can help each other. Patrick, I see you joined, and Marcus, please go ahead if you want to say something.
If somebody else is capable of taking notes so I can drive, I would appreciate it. Just let me know. But yeah, I was trying to capture kind of the notes from what you were saying there, but it pretty much boiled down to you're trying to find the overlap between the thing that you're doing and this, and try to find the where these things converge, right?
Yeah.
Hey, this is Doug. I just want to chime in quick that I'm really happy that you're bringing this up, because this is something that I believe is really important to this effort as a whole. I'm pretty sure it's one of our top use cases that we stack ranked was for enabling, hardware resources for like SRIOV for your networks, right? So this is something that as part of Network Plumbing Working Group, we're definitely also in consideration of. However, I agree strongly that the way that this works with device plugin and using Multis with the net attached def method, it's more complicated than it needs to be. It's really difficult to debug. I think that there's a lot of kind of glue there that could be organized. So I'm just really I'm not familiar with this Quas resources cap, which I'll take a look at. But yeah, I think this is really important to the group, and I think that it's something that could definitely be better organized as we move forward. So just wanted to say that yeah, I think it's important, and I'm glad you brought it up. That's it.
Cool. Yeah, thank you.
Sorry, can I butt in with one more comment from my perspective on this? So this is
If
Peter
people
White from
could raise
Microsoft.
their hands, it helps to queue, but no
Yeah,
problem.
I'm sorry.
No worries.
I'm going to admit that I couldn't find the raise hand button.
Okay, no worries.
I will look for it more competently next time. So yeah, so let me explain my perspective on this. So the issue that I'm interested in is that we say have a CNI plugin setting a network interface, something like that might require a bunch of parameters that are specific to this particular interface or this particular pod. And I've been trying to think about, well, how would you pass that? It feels like this is very much that, in that you can have some quasi resource that is opaque to Kubernetes that you could put some kind of information in and have a link to it. Does that cover the same? Is this answering that requirement? Do people see those as being compatible, the same thing, or?
Yes, I think that exactly the kind of QoS resources. Well, it's not probably well. Kind of naming is kind of bad for probably for this case, but anyway, I guess that is exactly, and we have a proof of concept kind of integration to CNI. So with if you specify certain class for this pod, then it will kind of deliver some admin specified parameters to the CNI plugin. So I guess that's exactly the kind of use case that we've kind of demonstrated there with the QoS class network integration. but then I guess DRA is more like managing kind of interface kind of devices and more complicated usage scenarios with possibly kind of allocating multiple interfaces for a pod or something like that. But I would see this QoS mechanism more like a passing parameters, like capabilities to the CNI plugin. I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah, very much. It sounds like the naming doesn't quite match my use case, but the actual architecture and how it's set up, that all sounds perfect to me. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah,
I'll have a really look at.
Yeah, so it's the QoS mechanism is what we're proposing is sort of in a very high level, like attaching sort of identifiers to pods and containers, and then the kind of lower level knows what to do with if this pod has been assigned to, well, let's say network, and then class identifier fast, and then it resolved basically in the under Kubernetes what parameters to.
So you're wrong. What does as well, but it's hard.
What's going on here? Somebody talking?
I think we had a hot mic from.
Yeah, I think we did.
Cambria. I'm just going to go ahead and mute you.
Do the mute. Okay. By the way, I am taking notes while also trying to drive. I may not get things right, so please do, if you see that my note doesn't really reflect what you're trying to say, go change my note. Prashanth, you had your hand up first. Go ahead.
Yes, hi. Just curious. I haven't had a chance to read through the CAP yet, but so is it fair to say that the way you're thinking about this now is to just ask for a new type of resource for the pod spec through the pod spec? Is that the high level summary? And then somehow pass it to the CNI. Okay.
Yes. Yeah. If you have time I have a kind of short demo I could show at some point if you have time. So how it would look like from the user point of view, and how it kind of maps the CNI config and like how it looks like in practice, in the implementation. Okay. So that might be like a good way to understand like how it in practice would look like.
I do have follow-up questions, but if the forum feels that a demo would be useful, then I probably just want to see the demo and then see if it gets answered there. Because do we want to see the demo now, or?
This is the only agenda item unless we want to go through the CAP. I guess show of hands or thumbs up. Does everybody want to see the demo? Maybe we could give it a minute, see how far we get with this, and then like come back around to the demo.
Okay, then maybe let me just ask my follow-up question.
Sure.
So then, and when we say quas classes, are we talking about like DSCP bits being set in the packet somehow, or are we just talking about queue priorities? Like how far are we going here? I mean, again, disclaimer: I haven't read through the CAP, so.
Sorry, I was dropped for a moment.
I will probably try to answer that. So the way the CAP doesn't actually specify what this QoS classes means. What we are trying to do is to have a universal way of discovering of QoS resources, and when announcing it to a kubelet, and like always, like scheduling, accounting, quotas, all this functionality. What it actually means, it depends on like from where we are discovering those QoS classes. So example with cache, it's a configuration file, what we like runtime discovers. Same with block.io. So like runtime tells to the kubelet what we have like block.io classes like gold, silver, bronze, and something in default, and that's it. Kubelet doesn't know anything about it. So the same applies to the network QoS, like how we are envisioning it. So we can, from CNI configuration file, we can discover what kind of QoS classes are present and what it actually, like which parameters to which plugins it needs to be set. So when the CNI plugins will be called, we will get those parameters passed down based on QoS classes which was requested. And what it will be doing, like DSCP flags or whatever, it's up to CNI plugins to decide what should be done. In the demo, what Marcus have, he has an example of bandwidth plugin, so like just injecting web throttling parameters. But again, it's up to the bottom levels to decide what classes actually mean.
Okay. I have a few more, but we'll just I'll wait for just giving everyone else a chance. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Daniel, you were next. Go ahead. Daniel put his hand down. If you're trying to talk, Daniel, we can't hear you, or I can't. Okay, we'll try to come back around to you, Daniel. Let us know in the chat if there's a problem. Go ahead, Zappa.
I lost a little bit as I was a little distracted over here. I lost track of the conversation, and I was trying to just see if this was potentially scope creep from the the spirit of the multi-network KEP of just defining the pod network resource, and then where did we leave off here? This is where I got confused. Sorry.
Yeah,
question as well.
Probably it's part of like reason of that confusion is me, because as I mentioned, like we have two things what our teams are developing. Like one is DRA, dynamic resource allocation, and this one is actually more related to multi-network scenarios. And QoS KEP is more about like quality of service or throttling parameters. But as one of the feedback from Tim Hawking is what it can be misused to implement multi-network, like Multus is doing right now with annotations. Like Multus can represent with something similar using QoS classes. It's not a major scenario, or it's not the target where we wanted to use, but I just wanted to put it on the table. What like both of those features somehow overlap with what this group is doing.
Right on. Thanks for the clarification. Yeah, I guess my one other question to follow up was if those are like implementation details and play into the pod network resource or not.
Sorry, I didn't get the question.
I'm just curious, as Macho would say, are those implementation details? As he tries to stray away from the inner workings of how multi-network would work.
Frankly speaking, we don't know what is currently discussed in this SIG, and like it's first time we are joining this, so I don't know answer to your question.
Okay. Is somebody who was I was trying to help and stuff with a couple of things, so I was a little disconnected. If somebody who's tuned in could put the notes down for that conversation so we can capture that on the doc, I would appreciate that. Daniel did you need to go? Did you have more that you wanted to say there, Zappa?
Yeah, sorry.
Nope, I'm all good. Daniel, go for it.
Okay.
Yeah,
ahead,
it
Daniel.
was actually in
We
the
hear you.
frame. Okay, so it's already almost in the same line as what Michael was saying, is that if we keep the KEP actual to multi-network definitions and attachments, the question with QoS would be the same if I want to enable, for example, L4S or any other kind of profile. Should it not be outside into a different kind of resource definition that you can then assign to a network or the default network, but independent on if it's multi-network or not? But I could have a default new network with no specific parameters and then I would have another one, then I can specify, okay, now assign that network profile, for example, which is either QoS or some higher level, and then like make it called low latency, and that's it. That's why I'm kind of afraid of the scope creep. I don't think it was part of the initial discussion for that current cap.
I think, like, if you look at the QoS feature, scenarios like something what will select the default network, let's say like low latency network, or let's say like storage class network, and so on. So this fits quite nicely in the semantic of QoS resources. But if you have scenarios where you want to say, I want the network interface with VLAN XYZ, when probably DRA is the better abstraction. So practically, like this dynamic resource allocation abstraction already present, and it's like it's not hard-coded for some implementation, so we can extend it to be also network compatible.
Yeah, so the question is, let's say I say to a pod attachment, I say I need to have specific QoS resource. And because of that QoS resource, it's forced into a network. Maybe that's what Tim was saying, is you're kind of bypassing a bunch of rules, say, well, you need that QoS resource, so you need to be attached to that network. Is it in that frame of mind?
Yeah, it can be done like that.
Okay, so but that's the issue is that you're kind of bypassing the multi-network parts because I want resources, even though I should not necessarily be allowed, I'm gonna be attached to that network. That's where
no, it's not like easy like that. So
okay.
First of all, like if you look what we currently have, you have a multus to do with these things, and you have annotations, and annotation is like wild west. Right? So everybody can use it. In case of QoS classes, it's not like that. So first of all, like the runtime is responsible to announce it to the kubelet. So the node knows which classes are present on the node, and scheduler can select them. Second thing, the QoS classes have a notion of capacity. What was added by one of the feedback from the Red Hat people. So practically, you can say not more than 5 port accessing per node to the fast network or low latency network, if you say. And third thing is in proof of concept, what Marcus have, there is implementation about the quota and default values. So practically, you can say what this namespace allowed to use only like standard network or like storage network, but no access to low latency network. So the policies can be enforced on top of QoS resources.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks for the clarification.
Yeah.
And
again,
another thing about the DRA. So DRA is a bit different approach. So it's like, again, it's also quite opaque to the Kubernetes. So Kubernetes doesn't really know what is behind it. But the main difference is what DRA driver is like the vendor logic, which handles the allocation and, well, actually attachment of a particular device to the container. So if this flexibility, what we did with QoS is not fitting the model, then probably like DRA provides more flexibility, but for different set of use cases.
Yeah, let me chime in here, because I think there's one thing that has been perhaps missed with the comparison between DRA and QoS. So DRA is specifically about custom parameters. Parameters that describe a resource that is required by a pod, and that mechanism influences scheduling, and it's done through the DRA drivers. So you can have custom logic that says this pod here needs this thing, and that thing is only available on this node here, or I can make it available on this node. So for things that really are logic or vendor specific, I think DRA may be the right solution. if you look at the Malthus API, which I admittedly haven't done, the things that it does with annotations probably will be a good fit for DRA, where those annotations get turned into fields in a custom resource definition. And the custom resource definition would be owned by Malthus, so it wouldn't be standardized. Any third-party vendor could define its own thing. And DRA will just handle the logic, the integration into Kubernetes. Anyway, that was the main point that I wanted to make.
I missed I got a little lost on the bit, like what were some of your supporting reasons for like DRA being the better solution here, so I can get those in the notes.
If you have custom parameters, things that really are outside of the scope of what device plugins support or what QoS supports, then it probably will be possible with DRA.
Cool, thank you. Unless anybody has any more to add on that, we have Pete and then Prashant have their hands up.
Yeah, it's just a pretty quick thing. In terms of scope, I think what is in scope here is the API that we're specifying for how a pod indicates what networks it wants to be on, and I think by extension any parameters it wants to pass to those networks. And maybe I don't want to get into implementation. I think it's perfectly reasonable to say there's some implementation we wash our hands and we don't know about that, but there has to be some way of a pod passing some parameters, and I don't know whether that's going to be annotations, whether it's going to be reference to one of these CORS objects, whether it's going to be the DRA model, whatever. I don't mind, but I think we probably ought to take a position on that. That was it.
I hear that. That makes to me personally, as somebody who's a little on the outside of this, because again, I'm here to help facilitate, but I don't have a dog in this hunt right now. The idea that we need to come up with a kind of a clear and defined way to do this is something that I think should be a KEP blocker if it is not already. Like to pass parameters specifically. Go ahead, Prashant.
Yeah.
Sorry, just to follow up on the last comment, I haven't kept up with the evolution of the KEP. Don't we have a params field in the KEP already for any sort of vendor specific stuff?
For the Q.
Sorry,
Which KEP? Sorry.
Our multi-network KEP. I mean the API rather. Sorry, the API for pod network, doesn't it have a params field of some sort to say any vendor specific stuff you can point here?
Yeah, there is a provider reference. There's a provider reference that you can refer to. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So my question was actually about so from a networking perspective, I mean, QoS parameters for all the non-networking stuff, whatever block IO, whatever it is that we have in mind. Keeping that aside and just looking at the networking stuff, I mean, with multi-network, the way I'm seeing it is that we're trying to give not a singleton model anymore, right? Today, there is nothing called as multi-network. It's just one network, whatever, if you want to call it the default network, so be it, right? And with a non-singleton mode and networking QoS parameters, we would need a way to define like which network are we talking. I mean, when we say DSCP or whatever it is that is sort of network specific QoS configuration, we need a way to call out which network are we talking about, or are we talking about, because a pod could have a management network, a data plane network, high speed network, whatever we want to call it, versus a pod trying to say, I just need to be able to send, I don't know, 10 gigs of traffic, or, that's one definition of the QoS or whatever it is. across all networks, which seems a bit, not fitting very clearly into, well, then, which network are you really trying to talk about? Like, what are you trying to define in terms of network capabilities? So should this really be something we should consider in the pod attachment or pod network object, so that we can specify which network is trying to provide what kind of QoS qualities, versus a pod asking for, I just need this QoS quality for my network. I hope I'm making some sort of sense in that.
I tried to capture that in the notes, as I understood it. So if that's right, great. If not, please try and reword that for me. But I understood you as kind of saying like, there's something in the KEP you think already kind of talking about parameters, but we need to better define where we're actually applying those parameters, if I understood correctly, like, and have a definition for like how a user actually defines that takes into account that they might mean any network versus a specific network.
Yeah,
Or maybe I just completely blew it in terms of what you were saying.
Yeah, I mean, so it's not a very well-formed question. I'm just pointing out a few thoughts. I guess one thought is that there are CNI providers that says, I know what QoS means for networking, and here is what QoS means to me, right? And which could be in the provider, reference part of the object. That's one option. That we leave it to the provider to say, if you know what QoS means, put some fields in your object, and you can parse it, right? And the pod only says, I want to connect to network A, B, or C. The other option is to make it part of the main pod network to say, here are some generic definitions of what QoS is, right? DSCP fields or some bandwidth amount or something of that sort. That's just from an API perspective. What those semantically stand for, if you were to put it inside the common part of the pod network object, I wouldn't know, because what does it mean to Kubernetes? It's really more a vendor specific thing or a platform specific thing, right? And I always felt that whatever we want to keep Kubernetes to be aware of, and I say Kubernetes, the general core control plane part of Kubernetes, pod controller, deployment controller, etc., whatever they need to be aware of is what you would keep in the general part of the spec. And anything vendor specific, platform specific, you would put it in this provider reference. And there might be some platforms or some CNIs that don't understand QoS or cannot have that capability or don't have the capability. So, which is why I'm leaning towards the provider reference having, up to the vendor to decide whether they want to support QoS with whatever fields that they have.
Roger that. Go ahead, Wim.
Yeah, I also have the feeling, that I think if you look today with multi-networking, what we are trying to do is bring the multi-network, let's say, definitions inside of Kubernetes, whereas the DRA and the QoS solution, as far as I understand, so I haven't read the KEP, is more looking at the scheduling and how these parameters then are taken into account while scheduling a pod to a certain node and stuff like that. So I have the feeling that they are a bit complementary to each other as I see it right now. Because at the moment with the KEP of multi-network, we are more focusing on the definition and the information model to define multiple networks in Kubernetes. Whereas I have the feeling from the DRA side of the house, they are more looking at, okay, how these parameters are defined in the kubelet on the node, how they are used for scheduling and stuff like that. I might be wrong, but that's my sense of what I'm hearing.
Let me answer the later part. So with DRA, we already solved the things related to like how to pass the parameter, how handle the scheduling, how to extend the pod spec to reference all of this, and what to do with kubelet. So this mechanism, what was implemented, it's flexible enough so it can be expanded not only for like accelerator devices, but also for something like pod network. If you would like, I can show Patrick's blog post where you will see the like pod YAML example, so you can get the understanding a bit how the parameters are passed. What I'm saying about the overall DRA and multi-network use case is what, like with all the high level API things already sorted out for DRA. For us, it would be quite easy to extend to handle the network interfaces as well on the like kubelet and runtime side, if you are interested in that. So we can help your cap moment.
That's my comment is actually they are complementary, and as we said. So I think it would be good to see what you have done for the DRA side and see how we can, let's say, potentially unite the approach or reuse some of the components that you have, and I so try to cover both cases. So I'm saying the same thing as you. Let's have a look what the details are that you have implemented, and then we can see how we can converge potentially those two things.
Yeah, Patrick, do you want to show?
I want to second that here. So I looked at your Word document, and you do have in the pod spec a new field, pod network attachments. We already added a generic resource claims slice to the pod spec as part of DRA, and that could directly replace your pod network attachments, and that would make your life easier because then you don't need to get a pod spec changed, merged, or accepted as part of your cap. If you can base it on the existing field for a pod resource claim, then your cap becomes simpler. That's I think that is our point. And then what happens under the hood with that particular resource claim is up to you. You could have a DRA driver that doesn't influence scheduling by always saying, okay, well, just go ahead. And then kubelet will do whatever you had in mind for pod network attachment when it detects such a special resource claim.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
Yeah. Thanks.
Again, just continue to help me with notes if you feel like I've messed up any of these, but these are great conversations. Next, we had Tomofumi Hayashi. Go ahead.
Shane, I'm not able to share, so if you can open the link for DRA cap or DRA blog post so like ours can see, it might help the discussion.
Sure. Where's the link?
Can I speak that?
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
No problem. I'm sorry that this may be offline. This is not related to the multi-network community stuff, but also related to Maltus. So tomorrow the Maltus community have the maintenance meeting, and then at that time we are also talking about the DRA, the implementation stuff in the Maltus side. So if someone is interested, so this is of course not related to the matches. This one, that the more latest implementation of the Maltus. But if someone is interested in, please join this call. I'm putting in the this meeting information in the chat window. Just about it. So tomorrow's the 9:30 EST, I think.
Okay. Where is the link to what you're talking about? I'm not catching. Oh, there we go. Sorry, give me a minute. My stuff loads so slow. Okay, so the Maltus CNI maintainers are having a meeting tomorrow where there may be some relevance to the topics at hand here. I'll post the doc in here. It's been a while. I actually contributed to Maltus some years ago. Again, haven't had a recent dog in this hunt, but thanks for jumping in here and being involved in this process. Obviously, there's reason for there to be conversations going on between the two groups. Go ahead, Prashant.
Thanks. I mean, one of the goals, as I understand it, for multi-network is that make network a first-class citizen in Kubernetes, right? I mean, we could, like Maltus and other ways using device plugins, they can already use a resource request and say, I want to request this resource, which is supported by some sort of device plugin, SRIOV, whatever be the case, right? And so what does it really mean to make it a first-class citizen? Like storage, where we have a volume piece and, like compute, we would like to see, and this is my understanding today, so please correct me, the forum, if this is not what is being discussed lately. Network has a special meaning in the pod spec, and the meaning there is because, well, we need such a meaning there, or some semantic that's special for the word network that's assigned to the pod, is because there are a bunch of native networking concepts in Kubernetes, like services, gateway, network policy, whatnot, that today assume that there's only one network, so I don't need to specify which network I'm going to talk about, versus, well, I want to create a service for the red network or the blue network or the green network, right? So if we were to generalize the concept of a network as, hey, it's just another resource for the pod, then those services will need to start calling them out as that I'm talking about this resource versus the other resource, which really doesn't make, or maybe I'm finding it hard to see how it fits to say that service A is for resource X versus service A is for network X, right? And sure, I do see that, that there is the scheduling piece, there is a lot of overlap between DRA and a network, because we do want to put a pod on a node that subscribes to the red network, because the pod is asking to be connected to the red network, right? And I assume that in the DRA case, it's been a while since I read up on DRA. So in the DRA case, I assume that there is a mechanism to say, well, this node can provide this resource, therefore schedule, if you're looking for this resource, you're free to schedule this pod on this node, right? So there is the scheduling overlap. And so in my mind, I feel that there is an implementation piece that we could reuse, perhaps, but the API semantics, I feel that the goal was to say that network actually means something special in the Kubernetes world now. And all the networking stories that we find with Kubernetes need to be a bit more specific and not assume that there is only one of these type of resources. Does that make sense? I'm just trying to
Makes
call
sense
out
to me.
where I feel the overlap is.
Yeah, you're trying to make a general call out. So we're actually running at the end of time, which is okay because we only had one agenda item. So I let this run as long as it needed to. But this might be a good time to start kind of wrapping up and looking at action items. So to your point, so let's start thinking about like this conversation we've had and like what are the big takeaways and what are some of the actions that we can take here. I'll come right back to your point, but I wanted to go back and just kind of characterize. So the conversation has mostly been about there are a couple of different thoughts on different ways to add parameters to network interfaces. Because the KEP that we're working on is ultimately trying to do exactly what Prashant just said, or at least this is my opinion. Please stop me anytime if I'm mischaracterizing anything, but I see it as this. We're trying to make the network for a pod kind of a more, we'll call it, I'll just go with first class citizen for now, in addition to then allowing you to have multiple. So one of the things that seem to be a theme going through this is that the KEP may not be, and I am not deeply involved in this KEP again, because I'm not working on an implementation or anything right now. I don't have a horse in the race, but I don't think there's a ton of emphasis on that point. And so maybe the action item to take here is, okay, maybe the action item that I'll propose is we need to go back to that KEP and say, we need to make an emphasis on network having special meaning. And then we also need to make an emphasis on having a very good pluggable kind of generic way to plug in parameters and different network specifications, generic ones, as well as kind of implementation specific ones for these network interfaces. Does that sound right? Does that ring true with everybody that that's something we should be following up on in the KEP as like an emphasis we need to make? I'll shut up and drink some coffee now. Go ahead. I got one thumbs up. All right. If I don't hear anything, I'll assume that everybody's kind of like, yeah, maybe that's the emphasis we need to make, the direction we need to push for. Sorry I'll be typing while I'm just sitting here. Sorry.
But I think Prashant said it as well, right? I mean, the fact that the implementation under the hood could be reusable, right? So there is. I agree with Prashant that the representation of a network is important, right? Because otherwise, if you have like a genetic construct, it's hard. But it does mean that the implementation that sits underneath that interact with the kubelet and stuff like that, we could reuse some of the DRA stuff. That's what I was trying to say before as well.
Yeah, I think if you in that cap, you definitely need to explain whether you want this pod network attachments field or whether you can reuse the existing field for resource claims. Because if you don't explain that in the cap, you will get opposition from Tim Hawkin and Antonio from SIG Networking, because they are aware of DRA and they strongly suggested that we should talk to you guys about this and not add another new field to the pod spec. So if you have technical reasons or usability things, then this needs to be in the cap. That way, that's your justification for doing something different, if you feel that it's necessary, which I'm still not sure about, because it seems like you should be able to use what's there.
So you're just, I may have, because I was typing and my mind was a little lost. You're basically just putting an emphasis on, you know, we're going to need to not try to jam this into the pod spec. We need to do this as some kind of like.
I think if you can reuse the pod spec resource claim field for your purpose, it would be better. Yes. It will be less changes that need to be made to Kubernetes, which will address concerns that people will have about any new field. You can still define what that resource claim looks like.
Yeah,
that's what your cap can be about. But this particular one field doesn't need to be called pod network attachments if resource claims also works.
Yeah, as I'm digging deeper into this, and I think I'd be interested to hear Zappa's frame reference too, because we're both leads. It makes what you said makes perfect sense to me. We would like to avoid jamming all this stuff into core, because if we do that, it'll be there forever.
And I know exactly why that is hard, because I've done it.
It's hard, yes.
And it has to be hard because you can't once a field is in the core V1 API, it stays there forever. You basically can't change anything.
Yeah. So I'll try to incorporate your point into my, I think I'm going to take this action unless somebody else is dying to. I would love to have somebody else take this action, but my intention was to take this action, and I would incorporate your extra point about we need to do this in some way that doesn't make us have to live with it forever as part of core, if possible. So I didn't see the order in which the hands went up, so please do just, if you were first, go ahead.
I think Patrick maybe was first on this. Patrick, do you have a comment? Okay. That's a fair statement. Again, you know, the question is like, well, why does it need to be a first class system? Why does it need to have a special semantic? I mean, in theory, we could have everything as a resource, like storage is a resource, CPU is a resource, network is a resource, etc., etc. And if Kubernetes, again, this is my viewpoint, Kubernetes did not care about some of these natively and says, okay, everything is a plugin model based on the resource or resource type. You could trigger some plugin somewhere in the core component area, right? That says go deal with this type of resources, so storage or CPU. Perhaps that sort of fits well with what you're bringing up, but it is not the case. I mean, I thought the point of the API Kubernetes was to make things, make commonly used things a bit easier to use. We know that every pod needs a compute, needs storage, and we also know it needs networking, right? So versus every pod needing a GPU or a TPU, that's a different story, right? And versus, so what I'm trying to say is that that I guess we can clearly call it out in the KEP. Why should networking be a first class, or really call out as a first class thing? And I'm trying to make my point here to say that, hey, it's because it is a core thing that is needed for a pod to run, right? Unlike the other ones that are sort of optional. And because it is a core thing, and because we want to make core things to be easily manageable, we came up with these Kubernetes. I assume this is sort of me extrapolating why we landed up here. We came up with these Kubernetes networking, concepts, like services and whatnot, because we know that that's how customers are probably going to use pods in a Kubernetes cluster, right? And we want to make it easier for them to use it, so that adoption rate and whatnot. So again, I think the high level point that, hey, we need to be more clear about why should this be a first class citizen. Sure, I think I'm taking that as the like Shane said, that the AI should be that we need to call that out first before we say we want to make it a first class citizen. Like, I guess we have to call it why.
I have some questions and maybe some confusion, but I'll go second because Pete put his hand up first. Go ahead, Pete.
Yeah, so
And
this
we
is
are running low on time. Let's keep that in mind.
Sure, this is a very short but maybe important technical point. The DRA stuff for here is a custom resource, here's some stuff I need, and then that can do some magic, whatever that magic might be that we don't have to worry about. That is great, except that it is not per interface. And some of what we want here is going to be per interface. And so that might change things. Now, maybe we can work our way around that, annotation somewhere, something like that. I don't know, but it feels like that's a difference in what we're doing here, because a pod can have multiple interfaces and they will have different resource claims for them. So we need some way of figuring that out. That's me.
That's not a problem. Like, you can have like multiple instances per multiple claims, and you can reuse the claims between containers and the pod, or between multiple pods if needed.
You do then have to somehow annotate them or indicate which claims correspond to which interfaces and so on. So there's a bit of plumbing there. I'm not saying it's unsoluble.
Yeah.
It's a case where it's slightly different. Yeah.
Okay, and we're just about at time. I'll try to keep mine short, but basically I'm seeing both Prashanth's and Patrick Oli's viewpoints as compatible, but I might have missed something. So Prashanth, it sounded like, if I got this right, you're kind of like, you were thinking we need to have more of this stuff be core. Did I get that? Was that what I was getting it right?
Yes.
Because it's a first class citizen. So like,
Yes.
I'm very much with we need to make it a first class citizen in terms of this KEP. In terms of the KEP, it needs to be something that like is clearly defined how implementations and users ultimately do all these things. But personally, I also agree. I agree with that it needs to be like an emphasis. But I also agree with Patrick's point that ideally we are not jamming it into core if there's a good way not to. And my reasoning for that, again, comes from kind of wearing my chair hat. The less we can put in core is ultimately going to be the better, because we've been burned by like putting things in core. But just look at the service API, like just like this is just it can be a big problem to put things in core that at the time we think is something that everything should be doing. We've had a better experience so far with doing things as, I'll call it satellite, like with Gateway API. We made a very explicit choice that Gateway API would be a core, it would be like a core Kubernetes API, and that it's kind of this is a Kubernetes API, this is going to be commonly used, but it technically is not core, and so it is therefore modular. I personally kind of lean towards modular for this, but I would very much invite you to kind of make more of a case for your point. I just don't know if I'm getting it yet. Does that make sense?
Sure. Yeah, we can, again, Machi and I have been, looking at this for a while, and I'm just stepping in for him while he's out. But I will give this feedback to Machi, and, we can certainly make more of a case as to why we feel making it in the core makes sense. Now, again, this is coming from perhaps an implementation reality perspective more than we need to do this. If you want to achieve the kind of outcome we're trying to achieve with multi-network, we feel that from what we have seen, what we've discussed, and what so far, Machi and myself, we probably need it in core. Maybe there's a way around it. And if there is one, we're more than happy to do that. But you know, it feels like, okay, I don't think there's a way around this. That's where we're landing. Hence the comment.
Understood.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm gonna put, we are at time, or we've got 1 minute. So we do gotta wrap it up. I'm gonna go ahead with the action of like starting to make some of these points in the CAP. Please be on the lookout for my comments so that you can join in and like talk to your friend and like basically argue with me in there. We'll have the conversation because I think it's a good conversation to have. But yeah, that'll be my follow-up to take that action. So I think we're good. We're at time. Please check out the KEP and some of the updates that should be inbound for review and stuff like that. There's one last thing on here about a demo of Quas next week. Put it on the agenda. Yeah, for next week, and we'll do that next week. Thank you everyone for your time.
Great work. Thank you for moderating. Go ahead, whoever is there.
Sorry, before everyone drops off, quick comment. Did we bring up the recent announcement about network function optimizers and whatnot from Google that could give more context about multi-networking? Multi-networking is a big piece in there. I don't know if these are things that typically get discussed in this forum, but I'm just curious.
Yeah, I don't know if we did. Maybe drop a comment for a topic for that for next week. We
Next
can
week,
put that on the
okay.
agenda for next week. Sound good?
All right, bye.
Thank you very much. Thanks, everybody. Until next time.